The message arrived on a Tuesday at 7:43 in the evening. I was sitting in front of the turned-off television. I don't even remember for how long. When I heard the phone chime, I thought it was just another notification, one of those that fill the silence with nothing. But when I saw the name on the screen, I felt my heart skip a beat. David, my son, after 8 months of absolute silence. Dad, let's have dinner on Friday, just the two of us. I miss you. I read that sentence over and over, trying to believe it was real. My hands were shaking. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. It had been so long since I'd heard from him that I had stopped hoping for something like this. For months, loneliness had become my only routine, and now, in a few words, a door I thought was closed forever had creaked open. I left the phone on the table, walked to the hallway mirror, and looked at myself closely. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the man I used to be. Grey hair, tired eyes, a shirt that hung too loosely on my shoulders. I wondered if David would recognize me, if he'd remember who I was before I became the man he chose to forget. The following days felt eternal. Friday seemed like it would never arrive. I cleaned the house, shaved my beard, polished my old shoes, and ironed the only decent shirt I had left. Each small gesture was a way to contain the anxiety and fear, because although the invitation sounded sweet, something unsettled me. It wasn't just the time that had passed since we last saw each other. It was the way he wrote it. Too proper, too measured. David was never one to write, "I miss you," but I clung to that illusion. Sometimes you have to lie to yourself a little to keep breathing. On Friday at 8:15, I was in front of his house, the same house where I had spent so many afternoons playing with my granddaughter, until her mother, my daughter-in-law Claire, asked me for some space. And David, as always, chose his comfort over his father. The neighborhood was the same. Quiet streets, warm lights in the windows, the smell of freshly baked bread wafting from the corner bakery. But now, seeing that white facade with the flower pots at the entrance, I felt something was off. The lights inside were out, except for one flickering in the dining room. The gate was ajar, and David's car was parked. I took a breath, adjusted my scarf, and walked up the stone steps. As I raised my hand to ring the bell, the door creaked open slowly, and from the darkness, the trembling voice of Rose, the housekeeper, emerged. "Mr. Price, don't come in. Please leave. Get out of here as soon as you can." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What are you talking about, Rose? Where's my son? I can't explain. Just go. Don't ask me anything." I saw the terror in her eyes. It wasn't nervousness, it wasn't confusion. It was pure fear. Something inside me clenched. She took a step back and lowered her voice. "Please, sir, trust me. Don't go in." My heart was pounding. "Is something wrong with David?" I insisted. She shook her head, glancing inside. "No, not with him. With you." The door slammed shut, and I was left there on the porch with the sound of my own breath echoing in my ears. I don't remember walking down the steps. I only know I ran to my car as if the air itself was heavy in my lungs. I sat down, locked the doors, and started the engine, but I didn't move. Fear mixed with disbelief. What was happening? From the driver's seat, I had a direct view of the dining room windows. I waited. 3 minutes passed, nothing, and then suddenly the house lit up. One after another, the interior lights turned on, as if someone had been waiting for me to leave. 2 men I didn't recognize appeared. They carried briefcases and envelopes. David followed them, his expression serious, talking on the phone. Behind him, Claire, dressed in black, was hastily reviewing some papers. Something didn't add up. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a meeting, a carefully planned one. As I watched, Rose appeared for a second in the window. Her eyes met mine. She gave a slight shake of her head, a gesture that said more than 1,000 words. "Don't do it." I started the car but didn't drive off. I just watched. 5 minutes later, David walked to the large window. He took something out of his pocket, a document, and as he signed it, he smiled. a smile I couldn't remember ever seeing on his face. In that moment, a knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't sadness, it was a mix of fear and betrayal. My son, the same one who once hugged me with tears in his eyes when his mother died, the same one who swore, "I'll always take care of you, Dad," was now in there in my old house, signing something I knew instinctively had my name written on it. The reflection of the lights mixed with my breath, fogging up the car window. I had to close my eyes for a few seconds to keep from breaking down, because sometimes the soul knows, before the mind does, what is happening is more serious than you can bear. But then I saw it. David handed an envelope to Claire. She put it in her purse, and unexpectedly they both looked up towards the window, towards where I was. I ducked instinctively, my heart hammering against my chest. I waited a few seconds, and when I looked up again, the curtain was drawn. The inside was once again in shadow. Something told me I shouldn't leave, that the night wasn't over, that if I left, I would take with me a doubt I could never forget. But before we continue, I'd love to know if you've subscribed to the channel and if you've liked the video. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories. Now, let's continue. Because what I discovered from my car that night changed my life forever. The sound of the running engine kept me company all night. I didn't have the courage to go back home. I stayed there, parked across from my son's house, watching the lights go out one by one, until only one remained on, the one in the study. Inside, David paced back and forth, talking on the phone. I could see him gesturing with that impatience he inherited from me, but without the tenderness his mother used to put into every gesture. Suddenly, he threw something onto the desk, ran a hand through his hair, and stared blankly into space. For a moment, I wanted to believe that in that silence there was room for regret, but it was too late for naive hopes. As I watched him, memories began to knock at the door of my mind, one after another, uninvited. I remembered the day everything changed. It was almost 3 years ago, in that same house, during an argument that started over something so small it now seems ridiculous, the sale of the old family estate. After my wife Eleanor died, I was left alone in that enormous house. David insisted I sell it. He said it made no sense to keep it, that it would be more comfortable for me to move closer to them. But I couldn't. Every corner held something of her, her scent, her voice, her laugh when she cooked clumsily. Selling it would have been like burying her for a second time. "Dad," David said to me that day, his tone impatient, "there's no point in paying taxes on an empty house." "It's not empty," I replied. "Your mother is here." "Your mother isn't here anymore, Dad. That's what you think." Claire, his wife, intervened with that cold voice she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "It's not healthy to live in the past, Mr. Price." "And it's not healthy to live without roots, my dear," I answered. She stood up, annoyed, and got straight to the point. "David is right. If we sell, we can invest that money. It's not about erasing memories, but about seizing opportunities." "We?" I asked, looking at her. "Or is it about what you can seize?" David slammed his hand on the table. "Enough, Dad, don't attack her." "I'm not attacking her," I said. "I'm just defending the little I have left." It was then that I heard him say the words that still burn in my soul. "If you'd rather live among ghosts, fine, but don't expect me to join you." That was the last sentence we exchanged before the silence that separated us for months. Then came the distance, the unanswered messages, the forgotten birthdays, until this invitation appeared like a flame lit in the darkness. At midnight, when the lights in his house finally went out, I lit a cigarette, even though I had quit years ago. The smoke scraped my throat, but the fire gave me a strange clarity. Something inside me told me that this dinner wasn't a reunion, but a carefully laid trap. But why? What could my own son gain from hurting me? And then I remembered Rose, her terrified look, Her whispered voice. Not with him, with you. That phrase repeated in my head over and over. Something was happening, something beyond my comprehension, and it wasn't a product of my imagination. At 2 in the morning, I decided to leave. The neighborhood was asleep, and only the distant sound of a dog broke the silence. I drove aimlessly for a while until exhaustion forced me to stop at a gas station. I ordered a coffee and sat by the window, watching the neon reflection on my windshield. A young employee, about 20 years old, came over and asked if I needed anything else. I shook my head. "Are you okay, sir?" he insisted. I didn't know what to say. How could I explain that I had just discovered that your own blood can turn against you? I just said, "I'm tired, son. Tired of not understanding why love wears out so fast." The young man looked at me for a second and then walked away in silence. His simple gesture reminded me of something. Not all youth is lost. My son was once like that, generous, sensitive, until the world, and perhaps I myself, made him hard. I returned home just before dawn. The clock read 5 a.m. when I walked through the door. The air smelled of dampness and dust, of long-term loneliness. I turned on the desk lamp and slumped into the chair. On the table was the photograph I've kept for years. David, barely 8, sitting on my shoulders at the beach. We were both smiling. I believed then that nothing could break that bond. I held the photo in my hands and looked at it for minutes. The sadness wasn't anger. It was a kind of aged nostalgia, a feeling of having failed without understanding how. Maybe I didn't know how to love him right. Maybe I demanded he be strong too soon. Maybe I confused discipline with harshness and affection with control. Fathers make mistakes too. We just sometimes find out when no one wants to listen anymore. Suddenly, the ringing of the phone pulled me from my thoughts. It was an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. "Yes, Mr. Price? It's Rose." My body tensed. "Rose, what's wrong?" "I can't talk for long. I just wanted to make sure you left." "Yes, I left, thank God." "What's happening?" I asked, trying to control the tremor in my voice. She hesitated for a few seconds. "I can't tell you over the phone, but you need to meet me. It's important." "Where?" "Tomorrow at noon in the cafe at the old train station. Don't tell anyone you're going." The line went dead. I stood there, motionless, holding the receiver as if it weighed a ton. The shadows of the past mingled with those of the present, forming a labyrinth I wasn't sure I wanted to escape. I knew I should sleep, but sleep didn't come. Only the image of my son at that window, signing something I didn't understand, and the echo of a woman's voice that, for the first time in a long time, brought not comfort, but a warning. And though my heart wanted to believe in David's innocence, my father's instinct told me that the truth, when it was revealed, wasn't going to save me. It was going to destroy everything. The old train station was nearly empty. The clock high on the wall read 12 o'clock sharp, but it seemed stuck in another century. The air smelled of stale coffee and dust. I sat by a window where the midday light barely managed to pierce the grimy glass. I ordered a coffee and waited. I wasn't sure if Rose would come. I wasn't sure I should even be there. But when someone looks at you with that much fear and begs you to run, you can't ignore it. Especially when that fear comes from someone inside your son's house. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The coffee had gone cold when I saw her enter. She wore a dark coat and sunglasses that barely hid her nervousness. She looked around several times before approaching. "Mr. Price," she whispered, "thank you for coming." She sat across from me without taking off her coat. Her hands trembled so much that she spilled a little coffee when she picked up her cup. "It's all right, Rose. No one is watching us." She shook her head. "You don't understand. If they see me with you, I'll lose my job. Or worse." That last word hit me harder than any other. Worse. Tell me the truth, Rose. I tried to sound firm, though my heart was pounding. What's wrong with David? It's not about him. It's about all of them. What do you mean, all of them? Your son, his wife, and that lawyer who was at the house last night. I leaned forward. Explain. She took a deep breath as if gathering courage. For weeks, something strange has been going on in that house. Envelopes arrive, strange calls. Mrs. Clare forbade me from entering the study, and yesterday... She paused. Yesterday, I overheard a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. What kind of conversation? One about you, sir. My heart lurched. About me? Rose nodded. They said everything had to look like an accident, that after Friday, no one would suspect a thing. My blood ran cold. An accident? What do you mean? They wanted to invite you to dinner to... She lowered her voice. To harm you. The silence between us was so thick I could hear the ticking of the station clock. I put my face in my hands. I didn't want to believe it. My own son. My blood. No, I murmured. There must be a misunderstanding. Rose looked at me with a mix of pity and fear. I wish there were, sir, but I heard your daughter-in-law say they couldn't leave any loose ends. If that old man doesn't sign the papers, we'll have to handle it another way, she said. My fingers trembled. What papers? She opened her purse and took out a folded envelope. I found this in the kitchen. It was in a folder with your name on it. She handed it to me with trembling hands. Inside were copies of notarized documents. The heading read, Cession of Patrimonial Rights. Edward Price. The signatures at the bottom were mine, or at least they looked like mine. But I never signed this, I whispered. I know, Rose nodded. That's why I told you to leave. If you had gone inside that night, you wouldn't be here talking to me. I felt dizzy. The world spun for a second, and I had to grip the table to keep from falling. I stared at the papers, incredulous. I couldn't understand how it had come to this. Who is this lawyer? I asked. A man named Robert Payne. He's been coming to the house for months. Your son says he's his financial advisor, but he's actually helping his wife transfer everything to another account. In whose name? Hers, and a company that doesn't exist. I fell silent. In my head, the pieces were starting to fit. The months of silence, the calls he never answered, the forced tone of the invitation. It wasn't a reconciliation. It was an ambush. Rose leaned toward me. You can't go back to your house, sir. You can't sign anything or talk to them. So, what should I do? Find someone you trust and disappear for a few days. Disappear. The word echoed in my mind. It was absurd. To run. At my age, hiding like a criminal to survive my own family. But when I looked at her, I knew she wasn't exaggerating. The fear in her eyes was real. And my son, the same boy who once told me, I want to be just like you, Dad, had ceased to exist. We left the cafe together. The sun was setting, painting the cobblestones an amber hue. Rose walked quickly, glancing from side to side. Before she left, she squeezed my hand. Don't trust anyone, sir, not even your son. I watched her walk away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, feeling like something inside me had broken. It wasn't just trust or security. It was my very identity as a father. I started the car and drove aimlessly. Rose's words echoed in my head. After Friday, no one would suspect a thing. That phrase haunted me. If I hadn't heeded her warning, I might already be dead. I arrived home late that night, turned on the living room light and opened the documents once more. I looked at my forged signature. It was perfect, identical to mine. The stroke, the slant, even the pressure of the pen. I stared at the paper, trying to understand at what point I had stopped knowing my own son. Suddenly something shook me. At the bottom of the contract in small print was a date, Saturday, July 9th, the day after the dinner. That was the date they planned to present my session to the notary. They had it all planned, my death, my signature, my disappearance. I stood up slowly and looked in the mirror. The eyes that stared back were those of a man who could no longer be a victim. A father can forgive a word, an offense, a distance, but not a planned betrayal. That night I understood something. I couldn't go to the police yet. I couldn't act without proof, and most importantly, I couldn't let them know I was alive. Because if they wanted me dead, they would have to face the version of me they themselves had created. A man without fear, a father who had lost everything, and who now had nothing left to lose. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the scene over and over. My son, his wife, the documents, the lawyer, and my forged name at the bottom of a contract that sealed my disappearance. My mind was on fire, but my heart, in contrast, was ice cold. For years I believed I was a strong man, capable of facing anything. But the betrayal of a son carries a different weight. It's not carried on your back, but in your soul. It's a kind of pain you don't scream or cry about. You think it through. And that night, I thought too much. At 5 in the morning, I got up, made coffee, and sat at the table with the documents in front of me. I needed clarity, and the only way to get it was to transform my pain into something useful. I knew if I went to the police, they'd tell me it was just suspicion without proof, and if I confronted David, I would only accelerate the inevitable. So I decided to do what I never thought I would, play their game. I took out a notebook, opened it to a fresh page, and wrote one word at the top: plan. Below it, I drew 3 columns: people, timelines, risks. I felt absurd, like a criminal plotting a crime. But then I remembered Rose's words, "Don't trust anyone." And I understood that my only defense would be my own cunning. The first step was to find someone I trusted, and there weren't many left. That's when I thought of Martin Caldwell, an old friend from my youth. We had worked together decades ago at the engineering firm where I met Eleanor, my late wife. Martin was always a discreet, loyal man with a sharp mind for legal details. After retiring, he moved to a small house in the countryside, a few miles from the city. I called him mid-morning. It took him a moment to answer. "Edward?" His voice was raspy, surprised. "Good heavens, I thought you were in another country." "I wish I were, Martin," I replied bitterly. "I need to see you." "Is it that serious?" "Let's just say it's a matter of life and death." There was a silence on the other end. Then his voice turned serious. "Come this afternoon. Don't tell anyone." The drive to his house was long and silent. The road wound through dry fields and trees twisted by the wind. As I drove, I replayed every word Rose had told me. Every detail could be a clue, every memory a warning. When I arrived, Martin was waiting for me on the porch with his trademark hat and a mug of coffee. As soon as he saw me, he embraced me. "You still have that same smell of coffee and sadness," he joked. I smiled for the first time in days. "And you still smell like earth and hard advice." We sat by the fireplace. I told him everything, leaving nothing out. My son's message, Rose's warning, the forged documents. Martin listened without interrupting, slowly swirling the coffee in his hands. When I finished, he was silent for a few seconds. "So, they want to kill you," he finally said with a chilling calm. "It seems so. And what do you plan to do? Survive?" He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "That sounds good, but you'll need more than luck. I need your help. You know you have it." I showed him the papers. Martin read them carefully and nodded. "This is a professional forgery. Not just anyone could replicate a signature like this. Can you trace where it came from?" "With time, yes, but first we need to protect you." "Protect me how?" "By disappearing." "What?" "If they think you're out of the picture, they'll let their guard down. It's the only way to catch a snake. Let it think it has already struck." I stared at him. The idea was as absurd as it was brilliant. "And how am I supposed to disappear?" I asked. Martin smiled with the kind of cunning only clever old men possess. "Leave it to me. I have contacts at the local funeral home. If you're up for it, we can arrange a little domestic accident tomorrow." "Are you talking about faking my death?" "Exactly." The idea turned my stomach, but the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. If David and Claire planned to take my assets, they would see my supposed death as the perfect opportunity, and while they sank into their own lies, I could watch them from the shadows. I stayed the night at Martin's. He prepared a simple room with a wooden bed and a thick blanket. Before going to bed, I took out the photo of my wife and placed it on the table. "Eleanor," I whispered, "I never wanted it to end like this. But I can't keep being the father who waits. Now I have to be the man who acts." I turned off the lamp and stared at the ceiling. The silence of the countryside was absolute. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel fear, but a strange sense of control. It was as if life had handed me the wheel back after a long shipwreck. At dawn, Martin came in with a thermos of coffee and an envelope. "Here's everything you'll need," he said, leaving it on the table. Inside was a new ID, a notebook with fake entries, and a key. "What's this?" "A cabin I own on the outskirts, near the river. No one will find you there." "And after that?" I asked. "After that we let them talk, sign and move, and when they think everything is under control, I get my revenge." "No, Edward. You show them who you are." I stared at the fire crackling in the hearth. The flames danced as if they knew something was about to begin. And in that instant, I decided. I would leave behind the naive man I was, the father who only knew how to forgive. Because sometimes, for the truth to come to light, you have to walk through the shadows. I poured myself a cup of coffee and made a silent toast to my wife, to the rose who warned me, and to the sun who taught me that blind love can also kill. And so, with the first ray of sunlight on my face, I made the most important decision of my life, to die so that I could live. The sound of sirens was more convincing than I had imagined. Martin handled everything with a precision that bordered on the macabre. The plan was simple but risky: a supposed domestic accident, a fall down the stairs, a carefully worded suicide note, and an unrecognizable body that no one would question too closely. The body, of course, wasn't mine. A contact of his at the local funeral home took care of switching the records, and a fire did the rest. A controlled explosion in my old house sealed the story. Alarmed neighbors called the fire department. By the time the media arrived, they were already talking about a tragedy at the home of retired businessman Edward Price. From Martin's cabin, miles away, I watched the live broadcast. Smoke still billowed from the roof of what was once my home. A reporter spoke to the camera with a grave, theatrical tone. "Sources close to the family indicate that Mr. Price lived alone. An accident is presumed. Authorities are still investigating the cause of the fire." I remained silent. I didn't know whether to cry for what I was seeing or for what I had lost long before that night. That house had been my refuge, the last corner I still had of Eleanor. Now only ashes remained. Martin came in with 2 cups of coffee. "Cheers, you deceased old fool," he joked, raising his cup. I didn't smile. I didn't think it would hurt so much to pretend to die. "Only those who were truly alive feel that," he replied. The news spread like wildfire. Within hours, social media and local news sites were reporting my death. Old friends started leaving messages of condolence. Even some relatives I hadn't spoken to in years posted kind words. Death, I thought, has a strange power to reconcile those who lack the courage to do so in life. But the part that truly interested me hadn't happened yet: my son's reaction. And when I finally saw him on camera, I knew everything I had planned was worth it. It was the afternoon of the next day. The television showed the facade of David's house. He and Claire were on the porch, surrounded by journalists. David wore dark glasses, but his trembling voice tried to sound firm. "My father was a complicated man, but he will always be my father. We will miss him." He said it without blinking, with a perfectly timed pause, as if reading from a script. Beside him, Claire pretended to wipe away a tear. The reporter asked her, "How are you feeling, Mum, after this tragedy?" She sighed and answered with a broken voice, "We just want to close this chapter and move on with what he would have wanted. Peace for the family." Peace, a word that in her mouth sounded like poison. That night, Martin and I sat in front of the television with a bottle of wine. "So what's next?" he asked me. "We wait." "Wait for what?" "For them to make their first mistake." And they didn't take long. 2 days later, the lawyer Robert Payne appeared on the local news with David. They announced the reading of the will and the transfer of pending assets. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. They hadn't even waited to mourn. They had barely buried the ashes of the stranger they thought was me, and they were already claiming what was theirs. Martin smiled ironically. Greed has a better nose than a bloodhound. I dedicated myself to watching their every move from a distance. The cabin where I was hiding had an old radio, a small television, and an internet connection thanks to a generator. Martin installed discreet cameras at the entrance of my old house, what was left of it, and across from Robert's office. Every day we reviewed the footage. It was like watching a play where the villains forget the audience is still there. In one of those recordings, I saw Claire meeting with the lawyer. Their voices were clear. "Now everything is ours," she said with a smile that chilled me to the bone. "Almost everything," he replied. "We still need to release the overseas accounts." "Don't worry," she added. "David doesn't suspect a thing." I felt a sharp blow to my chest. Not only had they betrayed me, but she was also betraying him. The son who wanted to inherit from me while I was alive was now the useful idiot of his own wife. Martin looked at me, noticing my expression. "I told you, old man, in betrayals there are always hierarchies." 3 weeks passed. The country had already forgotten my death. David appeared in public as the new head of my properties, talking about continuing my legacy. His words sickened me, but what hurt most was seeing that my granddaughter Sophie barely appeared. I knew they were keeping her away from it all, and that reassured me. She was not to blame for any of this. One night, as I was reviewing my notes, Martin came in with a subtle smile. "The time has come." "What are you talking about?" "Your son made his move. He sold the last property under your company's name. It's all on record." "Perfect," I said, feeling a jolt of adrenaline. "So, shall we begin?" I nodded. "Yes, it's time for the dead man to speak." The next morning, we sent 3 envelopes from different post offices with no return address. One for the district attorney, another for a journalist, and the last one for David. Inside each were copies of the forged documents, the recordings of Claire and the lawyer, and a message written in my own hand. Not all deaths are the end. Some are the beginning of the truth. As I sealed the envelope, I felt something inside me close as well. The fear, the humiliation, the helplessness. It was all behind me. I looked at myself in the small bathroom mirror of the cabin. The face I saw was no longer that of a defeated man. It was that of a father ready to reclaim his name, even if it meant remaining dead to the world. But before we continue, tell me here in the comments what you're thinking of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Because the real hell was still about to begin. The silence when you're alive but the world believes you're not sounds different. It's not peace. It's a hollow echo, as if the universe is breathing without you. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to myself or answering the news anchors out loud. Martin would laugh and say that death was turning me into a philosopher, but deep down, what it was turning me into was human again. I'd been hiding in the cabin for a month when the first consequences of my envelopes arrived. The press exploded. Headlines on every news site. New doubts surface about the death of businessman Edward Price. Leaked documents implicate son in financial schemes. A fake widow and a lawyer under scrutiny. Seeing their faces on television, surrounded by microphones, trying to defend the indefensible, brought a mix of bitter laughter and pity. David looked pale, with deep, dark circles under his eyes. Claire, on the other hand, maintained the composure of someone who knows no shame. As reporters cornered them with questions, he stammered. She lied with a serenity that only comes from habit. "This is all a misunderstanding," she would say. "My father-in-law signed those documents while he was alive. These accusations are cruel." But the evidence spoke louder than any speech. And as they sank, I remained silent, watching from the exile I had created for myself. However, it wasn't all satisfaction. The nights weighed on me, sleeping in a strange bed with the wind rattling the windows and the clock marking meaningless hours made me think too much. At what point do a father and son lose each other like this? When does love stop being love and become a calculation? I remembered David as a child, running through the halls of the old house, laughing with the innocence of someone who doesn't know greed. I had taught him how to ride a bike, how to write his name, how to never lie. And now he had signed my death warrant, not out of hatred but out of ambition. That was the deepest wound, knowing his betrayal wasn't born from contempt, but from desire. One night, while reviewing the reports Martin got from his contacts, I found a piece of information that chilled me to the bone. My granddaughter, Sophie, was in the hospital. She had suffered a nervous breakdown at school. No one told the press, but the medical report confirmed it. I stared at the paper, breathless. "It can't be," I muttered. Martin looked up from his desk. "What is it?" I showed him the document. He read it in silence. "The girl doesn't understand what's happening," he said regretfully. "Losing her grandfather, seeing her parents on TV. It's too much for a child." I clenched my fists. "She's not to blame for any of this." "I know, old man, but if you show up now, you'll ruin everything." "I don't care." "Yes, you do," he replied calmly. "If you act prematurely, the real culprits will walk free, and your granddaughter will grow up believing her grandfather was a madman who abandoned everyone. Is that what you want?" I fell silent. Sometimes Martin had a cruelty that hurt, but his words were true. I had to hold on, for her, for Eleanor, for myself. 2 weeks later, the authorities opened a formal investigation. The lawyer, Payne, was called in for questioning, and gradually the media began talking about a possible family fraud scheme. David sank deeper every day. Friends avoided him, business partners abandoned him, and Claire simply vanished. Until one night, I received an email with no sender, no subject, just one sentence: "I know you're alive." My heart skipped a beat. I called Martin immediately. "Does anyone know?" "Calm down," he replied. "What does it say exactly?" I read him the message. He was silent for a moment. "It must be Rose." "Why do you say that?" "Because no one else could know. And if it were your son, he wouldn't write. He'd come looking for you." My relief was short-lived. The next day, a second message arrived, this time with an address: the hospital where Sophie was. And just one word: "Come." I couldn't stay put. Martin warned me not to go, but there are some things no father or grandfather can ignore. So, as night fell, I put on a cap, dark glasses, and drove to the hospital. I parked far away, crossed the garden, and went in through a side door. No one recognized me. I went up to the second floor, room 214. I stopped at the door. From inside, I could hear a soft murmur, a lullaby. I pushed the door open just a crack and saw her. Rose, sitting by Sophie's bed reading her a story. The little girl was asleep, her head bandaged, her breathing calm. Rose saw me, stood up immediately, and rushed over. Her eyes filled with tears. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "What happened to her?" "She fainted at school. She said she dreamed you were calling her from a fire. She wouldn't stop screaming your name." I swallowed hard. "And David, he hasn't come once. He's hiding from the journalists and his wife. No one knows where she is." I walked over to the bed. Sophie, just 9 years old, breathed with the innocence that we adults lose. I gently stroked her forehead. "Forgive me, little one," I whispered. "This will all be over soon." Rose looked at me tenderly. "You have to come back, sir. Someone has to tell the truth." I shook my head. "Not yet. Something is missing. The final blow is missing." When I returned to the cabin, Martin was waiting up for me. I told him everything. He sighed. "I knew you would go." "I couldn't stay away." "I know. But remember, silence is your best weapon." I nodded, and for the first time in weeks I understood the true meaning of his words, because silence doesn't just protect, it also punishes, and those who once thought they could speak for me would soon learn what it feels like when the dead speak again. No one truly dies as long as they remember who they were, but sometimes, to survive, you have to stop being yourself. And that's exactly what I did. Martin helped me get a new identity. Manuel Rivas, 62, retired maintenance technician. A name with no past, no family, no history. The kind of man no one looks at twice, who goes unnoticed in a crowd. Perfect for what I needed. More than a month had passed since my fake death. The police were still investigating the case, but the media had already moved on to the next scandal. My son continued to sink in a sea of public ruin, and his wife had vanished from the map. Or so I thought. Until one morning, while reading the newspaper in the cabin, a headline froze me in my tracks. Claire Ramirez, widow of businessman Edward Price, reappears as new investor in the Eden Group, property of her late father-in-law. The Eden Group, my company, the one I founded with Eleanor 30 years ago. And there she was, smiling in a photograph, dressed in black with a mourning bracelet. A widow, rich, owner of something that never belonged to her. The fire I thought had been extinguished inside me reignited. It wasn't enough to watch anymore. I had to see her up close. And for that, I needed to get close to the only place where my name was still breathing, the offices of the Eden Group. Martin, though he disagreed, helped me get a temporary job as a maintenance assistant in the building. No one would suspect an old man fixing sockets and changing light bulbs. When he saw me in the uniform, he couldn't help but laugh, from businessman to electrician. If Eleanor could see you, she'd either laugh with you or slap me for not doing it sooner, I replied. The following week, I was there. The building I had commissioned myself greeted me with an alien, almost hostile air. Nothing remained of the warmth we used to share with the employees. Now it was all glass, metal, and surveillance. The hallways felt like cold hospital tunnels. I spent my first day changing bulbs on the 3rd floor. No one recognized me. Years had passed, and the beard, grey hair, and thick glasses did the rest. I was invisible, and that invisibility gave me power. On the 2nd day, I saw her. Claire stepped out of the elevator, flanked by 2 men in suits. She was laughing. Her perfume, the same one she used for family gatherings, filled the hallway. As she walked past me, she looked at me without seeing me, and that indifference was the most ironic blow of all. I had died so well that even my murderer ignored me. Over the next few weeks, I began to watch her every move, every visit to her office, every meeting with partners. I took notes in a small notebook I kept in my toolbox. Martin came by every night to collect the information. One afternoon, while cleaning the hallway windows, I heard something that made me hold my breath. Claire was on the phone in her office. The door was slightly ajar. "Yes, Robert," The money is almost ready, but I need David to sign the last document. No, he doesn't know anything. I'll just tell him it's an insurance update. I leaned on my broom, listening to her laugh softly. With this, everything will be mine, and when the old man shows up, if he shows up, he won't have a cent to claim. My fist clenched so tightly I felt my bones creak. I had to stay calm. My moment would come, but it wasn't today. Every word she spoke was another piece of the puzzle, and I was going to complete it with patience. One evening, as I was leaving the building, I heard my real name for the first time in months. Edward. I spun around. Rose, the housekeeper. She wore simple clothes, but her eyes were the same, brave and sad. "My God," she whispered, "I thought I was seeing a ghost." "In a way I am," I replied. "We took shelter in the side alley. She hugged me. I knew you hadn't died. I couldn't believe God would take a man like you that way. I'm alive, Rose, but I need you to keep pretending you don't know." "What are you going to do now?" "Finish what they started." I told her about my infiltration without going into too much detail. She nodded with determination. "Count on me. I still have contacts inside the house, and if she comes back, I'll know." "Thank you, my dear." I took her hand. "When this is over, I want you to be the one to tell the story." "No, sir, you will be." The days turned into weeks. David reappeared at the company, or rather, was dragged there by Claire. I saw him arrive one morning, gaunt, his suit wrinkled, his gaze lost. He looked like a man who had already lost everything. She held his arm, controlling his every step. From my position a few feet away, I watched them. "Just sign it, David," she said, handing him a folder. "What is this?" he asked, confused. "A document to ensure the company's continuity. It's for your own good." David signed. Through the reflection in the glass, I captured a photo with my phone. That image, that signature, was the last piece I needed. With it, Martin could prove the fraud was ongoing even after my death. That night, when I returned to the cabin, he greeted me with his sly fox smile. "You have everything now, Edward." "Almost everything. What's missing?" "Seeing them fall with my own eyes." Martin poured himself a drink and raised his glass. "Then, my old friend, welcome to the point of no return." We toasted in silence. The fire crackled in the hearth, and I understood something. I was no longer Edward Price. I was the nameless man, the ghost they themselves had created. And what I was about to do wasn't revenge, it was justice. Every hunt begins with a silence, a wait, a held breath. For months, they had hunted me, believing I was an obstacle, an old man easy to erase. But now I was the hunter. And the first rule of a good hunter is to let the prey walk willingly into the trap. Martin helped me prepare every detail. The plan had to be as meticulous as theirs, but with one difference. Mine wasn't intended to destroy innocent lives, but to reveal hidden truths. Justice isn't always found in courtrooms. Sometimes you have to build it with your own hands. The first step was to sow doubt. Using an anonymous account, we sent Claire and David an identical email. "I know what you did to Edward Price. Not everything was buried. If you want to keep your story intact, be prepared to pay." We attached a photo, the one of the forged signature David had made days earlier. We knew that would be enough to spark panic. That same afternoon, from my post in the building, I watched as they both arrived separately, agitated, looking over their shoulders. She went straight to the office of the lawyer, Robert Payne. He, on the other hand, locked himself in his office and didn't come out for over 3 hours. When he finally emerged, his gaze was lost, his face pale. It was the face of a man beginning to understand that the dead can also speak. Over the next few days, the emails continued, each one with a different tone, more direct, more threatening. Martin crafted the messages with surgical precision, while I reviewed them word for word. The goal wasn't to extort them, but to accelerate their moral collapse, to let fear force them to expose themselves. And it worked. David started making mistakes. He sold stocks hastily, transferred money to accounts that were already being monitored, and Claire, feeling her control slipping, tried to contact Robert to withdraw what was left. She didn't know that Robert himself was already under investigation. Thanks to the documents we had sent to the DA's office weeks earlier, the net was closing. One morning, while cleaning the windows on the 10th floor, I heard a shout. It was David. The door to his office flew open, and I saw him throw a folder on the floor. "It can't be! This can't be happening!" Claire followed him in, feigning calm. "Calm down, darling. We'll figure it out." "Figure it out?" he said beside himself. "They're closing in on us. Does anyone know about Dad?" She closed the door and lowered her voice. "Shut up. If anyone hears you, we're finished." I stood still, pretending to focus on my work, but every word reached me clearly. "You said everything was under control," David snarled. "It was, until you decided to trust Robert. Don't blame me. You were the one who—" The rest of the sentence was lost as the door slammed, but I didn't need to hear more. They were already destroying each other. My job was simply to let fear do the rest. That night at the cabin, Martin showed me a folder full of documents. "This is enough to sink them legally," he said. They were copies of transactions, intercepted emails, sworn statements. Every piece fit perfectly. All that was left was the final blow, public exposure. "Are you going to do it?" he asked me. "Yes." "Then, my old friend, it will be your resurrection." The opportunity came 2 days later. The Edan Group organized a press conference to clear up rumors. Claire and David would appear together before the cameras, proclaiming their innocence. There couldn't have been a better stage. That morning I dressed in my maintenance uniform and carried my toolbox. No one suspected the old janitor checking the wiring in the auditorium. I discreetly placed a USB drive connected to the projection system. On it were the documents, the recordings, the images, and my voice. At 11 a.m., the event began. The room was packed with journalists. Claire, looking flawless, took the microphone. "We want to thank you for your presence and deny the baseless accusations that have been circulating." David stood behind her, visibly tense. His hands were sweating, his eyes avoiding the audience. The moderator announced a brief audiovisual presentation on the history of the Price family, and then the screen lit up. First, a black and white photo of me. Then, the sound of my voice, deep and deliberate, like an echo returning from the other side. "Good afternoon. If you're watching this, it's because the truth has decided to speak. Not all deaths are accidents. Some are planned silences." Murmurs filled the room. Claire froze. David took a step back. On the screen, the documents began to appear. The transfers, the forged signatures, the recordings of her voice and the lawyers. Every line was a stab. The journalists stood up, pointing their microphones and cameras. Claire tried to smile. "This is a setup," she shouted, but the voice on the recording interrupted her. "With this, everything will be mine, and when the old man shows up, he won't have a cent." The room erupted. David, trembling, tried to turn off the projector, but the presentation continued. The final slide, a recent photo of me taken from the cabin, looking towards the horizon with a final text. "Edward Price is alive." The chaos was immediate. The press swarmed the couple. Security guards tried to cut the broadcast, but it was too late. Martin had done his part. The signal was being streamed live online. Within minutes, the entire country knew the dead man had returned. I, from a dark corner of the auditorium, slowly removed my cap. For a moment, David looked up, and our eyes met. His face went white. He didn't scream, didn't run, didn't say a word. He just understood, and in that silence I knew my revenge was complete. That night I returned to the cabin. Martin was waiting with a glass of whiskey poured. "Well," he asked, "the trap is sprung. And how do you feel?" "Tired." "That's justice, old man. It never comes for free." I stared into the fire. I didn't feel joy or triumph or relief, just a deep weariness, as if every year of my life had come rushing back at once. But within that exhaustion, there was something new, peace. Because sometimes silence isn't the end. It's the most perfect way to scream. The city was silent that night, or at least it seemed so from the cabin window, as the wind rustled the branches of the eucalyptus tree guarding the porch. On the news, they spoke of me as if I were a myth. Edward Price is alive, according to anonymous sources. I listened to their voices and smiled sadly. Yes, I was alive, but I was no longer the same. The man my son knew had died the day I saw him sign my sentence. Martin watched me from the armchair. "Sooner or later you'll have to face him," he said, without taking his eyes off the fire. "I know. And what will you do when you see him?" "It will depend on what I see in his eyes. And if you don't see remorse, then I will see, for the last time, the boy I lost." I didn't have to look for him. He came to me. 2 days after the press conference, David showed up at the cabin. I don't know how he found me. Perhaps he was guided by the same instinct that once connected us. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. I was chopping wood when I heard the crunch of gravel under a car's tires. I turned. He got out slowly, without hurry, without pride, without a mask. He wore an old jacket, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken. For a moment time rewound 20 years. I saw the young man who once asked for my help with his first job, but that memory vanished when he said, "Dad." The word pierced me like a knife. It had been so long since I'd heard it, I set the axe aside. "I didn't know if you would come," I said. "Neither did I." He approached slowly, his hands empty. We stood facing each other. The silence between us was heavier than everything that had happened. "So, you're alive," he finally said. "More than ever. Why did you do all this?" "To see how far your silence would go." His lips trembled. "You don't know what it was like, Dad. Claire." "Don't say her name," I interrupted. "Don't you dare hide behind her." "It wasn't that simple," he insisted, looking down. "I just wanted to settle the debts, to start over. She convinced me that you would understand, that it wouldn't hurt you. And signing my death warrant was part of that understanding." David flinched. "I didn't know that's what it was," he murmured. "I thought they were just papers." "Papers always tell the truth. The problem is who signs them." He put his hands to his head. "You don't know what it's like to live with this guilt." "Of course I do," I said in a low voice. "Guilt was the only thing I had left after your mother died." He looked me in the eyes for the first time, and I saw it. Remorse, fear, and something else. A sadness so profound that for a moment I almost forgave him. We sat on the porch. The wind carried the smell of damp earth. David spoke for a long time. He told me about the pressure, the debts, Claire's manipulation, the fear of losing everything. I listened in silence. I didn't interrupt him once. When he finished, I remained quiet. "And all of that justifies trying to erase your own father?" "No," he whispered, "but that's what I did." I nodded slowly. "You know, David, when you were a boy, your mother used to say you had a gift, the ability to convince people with your eyes, and you used it well. You convinced me there was still some good left in you." "Dad, don't let me finish." I took a breath. "I didn't plan this to humiliate you. I did it because I needed to see if the son I raised was still inside you, if that boy could still feel shame." He covered his face with his hands. Tears began to fall. "I feel it every day. Ever since I saw that press conference, ever since I heard your voice on those recordings, I haven't slept, I haven't eaten, I haven't had any peace." I stayed silent. For the first time, I didn't see the traitor. I saw the broken man my own mistakes had helped create. And what will you do now? He asked, looking up. Nothing, I said. You've already destroyed yourselves. The justice system will handle the rest. And you? I already got what I needed. He stood up slowly. I don't know how to live with this. Learn, I replied, or truly die. But if you choose to live, do it well. Not for me, for Sophie. Her name made him tremble. How do you know about her? Because I'm still her grandfather, even if you forgot. David broke down crying. I've taken her to a therapist. She keeps dreaming about you. She says you're calling her from a fire. Maybe I am, I murmured. Maybe I'm trying to wake her up before it's too late. He looked at me with desperation. Will you forgive me? That's not up to me. Then who? Time and the man you decide to be tomorrow. He stayed a while longer, not speaking. When he left, the sky was already dark, the sound of his car driving away mixed with the chirping of crickets. My soul felt tired but also light. For the first time in years, there was no anger, only emptiness. Martin came out to the porch with 2 glasses and a bottle. Well? There's no hatred left, I said. Is that a good thing? I don't know, but it's enough. We stared at the stars, and I understood that the justice I had sought wasn't that of the courts, but that of a look, the kind that neither absolves nor condemns, but simply reveals. The next day, I received a text on my phone. It was from David. Just 3 words. Thank you for seeing me. I replied with 3 others. Do it for her. I turned off the phone and went out into the garden. The morning sun fell on the damp wood of the porch. For the first time in a long time, I breathed without fear, because I understood that some wars aren't won when the enemy falls, but when you stop hating them. Winter arrived earlier that year. The leaves of the poplar trees fell before their time, and the air had that scent that announces something is ending. Sometimes I think nature knows more than we do. It understands endings without fear, without noise, without explanations. I, on the other hand, needed to close mine with words. A month had passed since David's visit. I hadn't heard from him again, but his silence no longer hurt me. For the first time in a long time, I understood that silence isn't always contempt. Sometimes it's redemption, and that was enough. Martin had gone for a few days to visit his son, so the cabin was calm. The fire crackled in the hearth, and on the table lay what would be my final task. A letter. Not for my son, but for Sophie, my granddaughter, the only innocent one in this whole story. My dearest Sophie, when you read these words, I might not be in this world anymore, or maybe I will be, watching you from afar, like grandfathers who live in the wind. I want to tell you something that isn't in books. The truth isn't always pretty, but it always sets you free. Your father and I made mistakes, he out of ambition, I out of pride. 2 different ways of losing love. If life ever forces you to choose between being right and being at peace, choose peace. I have loved you since the day I first held you in my arms. You had your grandmother Eleanor's eyes, that mix of tenderness and fire that transforms everything. Never let anyone convince you that kindness is a weakness. Sometimes being kind is the bravest act of all. Always remember this. Justice may be slow, but it arrives, even when the only judges are tears. I paused. The ink mixed with a drop from my eyes. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. I had lived long enough to see the darkness and still find light. I put the letter in an envelope, sealed it, and left it in the desk drawer next to Eleanor's photo. Her eternal, serene smile was with me even now. I'm done, my love, I murmured. You can stop worrying about me now. The following days passed quietly. The news spoke of arrests, legal proceedings, a dismantled corruption network. Claire and Robert had been detained. David, I learned, had cooperated with the authorities and received a lesser sentence. In a way, the truth had saved him, and I simply stepped away. I didn't need any more noise. I spent my afternoons on the porch with a blanket over my legs, watching the sun hide behind the mountains. Sometimes I thought I could hear Sophie's laughter among the trees, or maybe it was just the wind playing with my memory. One afternoon, as the sky turned orange, a car stopped in front of the cabin. I recognized the silhouette even before I saw her clearly. It was Rose. She had an envelope in her hand. "Good afternoon, Mr. Price," she said, smiling with that mix of respect and affection she always had. "Good afternoon, my dear. What brings you here?" "This," she said, handing me the envelope. A little girl with a braid and a notebook full of drawings gave it to me. She said it was from her favorite grandpa. I took it, speechless. Inside was a letter written in a child's handwriting. "Grandpa, Mommy says you're traveling. I dreamed about you last night. You told me that winter isn't scary, that you just need a blanket and a nice story. When you come back, I want you to tell it to me. I love you to the moon and back, Sophie." I read it once, twice, 3 times, and I understood that the story now had its ending. Not the one from the courts, not the one from revenge, but the one that truly matters: forgiveness. That night, I wrote one last page in my journal. Not for anyone else, just for myself. I faked my death to discover the truth, but what I found was my life. Love is not measured by blood, but by conscience. Some children kill their parents without bullets, only with indifference. But parents who truly love never die. They become lessons that time teaches their grandchildren. I closed the journal. The fire crackled, and every spark that rose reminded me that there is no sad ending when you learn to let go. Martin returned that same night. He brought wine and fresh bread. "Well, old ghost," he joked, "what will you write now that the story's over?" "Nothing," I said. "There's no story left to tell, only memories to cherish." We toasted in silence. Outside it began to snow. It was the first snowfall of the year. The treetops were covered in white, and the cabin finally felt like a home. That night, I dreamed of Eleanor. She was walking through the garden in her blue dress with her usual smile. She stopped in front of me and said, "See, my love, all you had to do was forgive." And when I hugged her, I understood that winter isn't the end of anything, just a form of rest. When morning came, Rose found the cabin silent. The fire was still burning. The cup of coffee was still warm, and on the desk were 2 envelopes, one with the letter for Sophie, another with a note that said, "If anyone ever hears my story, don't call it a tragedy. It was just the journey of a man who learned too late how to say goodbye. And if you, who are listening to my voice now, have made it this far, I want to thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave me a like, and tell me in the comments what you thought. Also, tell me what city you're watching from, and if you, like me, ever learned that sometimes living in peace is the best revenge. I am Edward Price, and this was my story.